Make sure, Stephen, you turn, once they go live on the digital transformation on the web, turn off the volume on that because you'll have the volume running on both. And there's a delay in it. So you'll see when it comes on, you have to turn it off or you'll hear talking from us 20
You see,
seconds.
we'll be joining in a second.
Yeah. Once they go live on the digital transfer. Yeah, I just shut mine off. And you'll see
But you
when
can hear me, can you, Jennifer?
yeah, and you can see the people come in. This is a great, I don't even have to talk to you later. You're getting the 101 now.
All right. If I remember.
So I'll go off and I'm just here if you need me. Yeah, the
I
viewers are
think,
coming in
I
now.
think the 30 seconds are up, are they? Just about?
Yeah.
I don't see any names coming in though to join.
There's one, so they'll come, all of a sudden they'll just pop in. Maybe that's me.
Not yet.
Mhm.
Still nothing.
We'll see. I'll check with Jean offline. I'm gonna take my picture off. Here they come.
Still nothing, Jennifer.
I have some coming through now. They're just popping in. So
Maybe
people
only you
coming-
can see that.
I don't know why. I have 10 viewers, so there should be more coming in, but maybe give it 30 seconds and then I would start.
All right.
Okay.
We'll give it another 10 seconds, Jennifer, and we'll get going. Okay. So my voice is on a delay now.
Just to let you know, there's about a 30-second delay between the Zoom and the CVent.
Wow.
I know, and so when you change, Jack, when you change your presentations,
Yeah.
it's delayed there as well. So if you can change it a bit earlier, that seems to work as well.
Okay.
And the viewers,
Not 30 seconds though.
no, it's hard to do that. But if you have if you think you can pop to the next slide and start before you start talking to it, it'll address that lag.
Okay.
Okay, I'll leave it to you guys.
All right.
All right. Let's get going now, Jack. Good
Okay.
afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this, what's going to prove to be a very interesting session facilitated by Jack Van Beek. The topic today will be teaching digital transformation management. There's been an accelerated adoption of digital business platforms in the past few years, driven in large part by the necessity to create virtual environments for all aspects of home, work, and school. University of Ottawa literally shifted.
Stephen, I can't hear you right now. Jack, can you?
And no, I think he stopped talking. At least his mouth stopped moving.
It's the delay that is messing things up.
Oh, I haven't noticed it before, so maybe just keep talking and it should,
All
it
right.
should flow. Just don't pay attention to the CVent screen much.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I'd like to introduce Jack Van Beek. Jack has worked in senior leadership roles in national science and engineering institutions, international consultancies, emerging and special purpose enterprises, and is the CEO of a national certifying body. So I'd like to turn things over now, Jack, for your presentation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stephen, and hello to everybody out there. Just the beginning of what appears to finally be our summer. And here you are looking at a screen. We'll try to keep it interesting so you don't mind being where you are to watch this. So one of the things I'd like to do is just give you a quick drive through where I'd like to take the conversation and provide a perspective as a user of digital technologies, and maybe explain a little bit the nature and depth of a shift that's been taking place at the University of Ottawa. And I happen to be running a program in the engineering master's program that has really embraced digital technologies. And I think I think I can say with some comfort now that we're probably further along than what we were doing in March the 13th, 2020, when basically all we did was took our materials and put it on a Zoom call. So we have moved beyond that, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So to get there, I'd like to talk a little bit about me, and not too much about me. Something about the forces that have kind of led us to design the program that we've come up with and why we felt it was necessary. Put a little bit of emphasis on professionals, or the kind of students that we're trying to attract to this program. Talk a bit about the shift that is taking place, and it seems to be much more dramatic than it was a few years ago. The skills that the marketplace is looking for, and then MEM stands for the Masters in Engineering Management, and you'll see the logo on the bottom of every slide. This is the program that I'd really like to emphasize today. And I guess ultimately, I'd like to leave you with a message about where we intend to go next, or over the next couple of years, because we're certainly not there wherever there is. So a little bit about myself. I am a former executive in a couple of different organizations, and I'm just broadly brushing Canada's research enterprise as my home for many, many years. Everything from the National Research Council to the Canada Foundation for Innovation, and a number of long-term consulting gigs thrown in there for good luck. I also have spent a few years setting up my own social enterprise, which is now, I guess, thanks to the last couple of years, unfortunately, is on hiatus. I've been involved in several startup ventures and started my life many years ago in the grocery retail business. And you can read the rest. And I think maybe the only part that's of interest possibly to what we're talking about today is that I have had a long career looking at complex problems and the development of various national policies. And I just seem to have, I'm not quite sure why, but I seem to have found myself in those situations where people have found really tough issues, usually involving emerging technologies, and in an absence of any sort of national policies. And I seem to get myself involved in a lot of those sorts of situations. So maybe to some extent, it's helped me develop a certain comfort level with the fairly extensive impacts of digital technologies on something I thought I was very comfortable with called education. So enough about me. I'm currently holding a role as a director of graduate programs in engineering management. I'm also a long-term part-time professor, been at it for many, many years. So here's my starting point. Boy, talk about appearing to be way off track here, but bear with me for a second. So when I was asked to take a look at this whole area, for some reason, I eventually settled on this as a starting point. And why this point? Well, I ran across many years ago, and I reacquainted myself with a small article written by Peter Drucker in the Atlantic in October 1999. And what he was talking about, everybody thought he was talking about the information revolution, and he ended up talking extensively about the Industrial Revolution instead. And what he was talking about was a scenario that I guess is hauntingly familiar, talking about something called the Long Depression. It lasted over more than 20 years. It was basically a slowdown of the world's various world's economies, and gave rise to some very, very dramatic changes in society. And to his point, what he found was a parallel between various stages of the industrial and the information revolution. And I guess what he finally settled down on was that the Industrial Revolution really was interesting in the sense that it was transforming various processes. But basically, it took what we already did and made them a little faster or made them lower cost. They saved time, they saved money, et cetera, until the railway came. The railway was the catalyst that changed everything. And his point in that article is very simple, that the unsettled times that we're in now have not really taken a hold until the internet settled in. And it was the internet that he's, and his points, I think, well taken. It's a very interesting piece of reading. He shows how the internet has done what the railway has done. The railway changed our mental geography. It moved us to a point as a society where the railroad, I guess, was a way of us starting to relax the assumption of geography. It mastered distance. In parallel, he's saying that the mental geography of, and at that point, he was really focusing on e-commerce, but a lot of what he's saying applies on a much broader base. He's basically saying that distance has been eliminated. There's only one economy and one market, and I think a lot of people would suggest, and I don't think any newscasters would disapprove of us suggesting that we increasingly see ourselves all being part of one world. We, on a very nightly basis, spend time worrying about places called Ukraine or Iraq or Iran or Afghanistan, et cetera. It's because we are all so profoundly connected to each other. So that's the starting point. Well, again, and it isn't just the fact that it's the internet or it's the railway. It's also the profound impact it has on absolutely every aspect of our lives. And the railways had that impact. It reshaped an entire society and reshaped the world as we saw it. And the internet, of course, is having pretty much the same effect. And just to sort of push that a little bit further, this is the type of literature that is now widely available. If you take the time to do some research, you'll find the World Economic Forum showing how interconnected we are, and they do it from a risk basis. And our friends at McKinsey will look at the various insights that they have identified as the drivers of our society, and many of them you'll see that the underlying commonality happens to be the digital infrastructure that we all pay very close attention to, especially since we've been in a long period of enforced seclusion. So that's kind of the dynamic that's out there. And then just to go and make the connection now between this fairly busy and dynamic and sometimes very confusing and uncertain external environment. The university has also worked through a number of gradual changes, and I'll suggest that gradual has changed to fairly rapid. But up to World War II, we were kind of theoretical. We were ivory tower. It was basically universities generally were seen as a finishing school for the elite. And I'm not sure I would fit into that those clothes very comfortably, but that was the role of universities. Now, since the Second World War, and a lot of it driven by funding models that we have and who strives to get into universities, et cetera, we found the introduction of public education and a very important role for public education to be played by universities. But we've also seen in parallel the growth of the government-funded research, and organizations such as NSERC and SSHRC and CFI have had a very profound impact on shaping the role of universities by virtue of the fact that expectations now have really evolved from serving the elite to serving society. Now, since 2000, while some of the vestiges of the previous eras still remain, we now have industry-funded research, and we have internships. We have a fairly heavy emphasis on international education. Now we have innovation hubs, so we have startup incubators, universities up to March the 13th, I guess, 2020, we're seeing very important role playing with not just Canadians, but with our neighbors throughout the world. Now, it's traditionally been part of our innovation system, that is universities. Now it's seen more as a vehicle for community and international advancement and connection. It's not unusual to see Canadian universities represented in different parts of the world trying to make contributions. Now, the changed role, and because of our digital capabilities, now a driving force for maybe a couple more steps in our evolution. Immersive learning experiences, for example, no longer seen as a perk, but as a necessity, or blending traditional and non-traditional teaching methods is increasingly becoming the norm. Moving between borders, gaining an international outlook is also a given now. It's increasingly just part of this particular element of our economy. And I think there's been a real shift, and especially because of COVID, student-focused learning is now becoming increasingly essential. So we seeing, especially through COVID, an acceleration of a lot of these sorts of changes in the role of universities. Now, a lot of these livelihood crises that many of our citizens are facing is starting to have an effect. And so the university as a vehicle for learning is now becoming part of a much bigger narrative that looks at a number of increasing risks, growing risks, and these are recognized by people like, again, like the World Economic Forum, who see climate action, extreme weather, biodiversity loss, for example, and livelihood crises. People are now genuinely concerned about the future of work and where they fit and how they will fit. And that leads to a whole series of other sorts of risks, including, and I'm sure any of you who have spent any time talking to younger people, there is quite a growing level of disillusionment. There's mental health deterioration, pollution harms to health, involuntary migrations, social cohesion, debt crises, social security collapse, all underlying risk of what am I going to do to make a living? How am I going to contribute to society? It seems that what was easy access, or in some cases reasonably well prescribed access to productive life seems to be in question. And so it's leading to a fairly high degree of concern, and all of these potential areas being contributed to by the fact that people are just not sure anymore where they fit and how they prepare themselves. So the university then, in recognition of this ongoing anxiety, has done a number of things and has grown quite dramatically. And I'm going to speak more from an engineering perspective, because that's where my home is these days. But we had in 2010 about 750 engineering students. We had about 700 of them were mostly Canadian, some professionals, but it was a fairly small student population. As people became more attuned to the contribution that a university education has, and it just by way of interest, you might check out all the LinkedIn postings over the last week or so, and we'll continue for another week or so as both Carleton and University of Ottawa grads start to talk about the experience and what it's done for them and how much it's meant to them. Well, in 2018, we doubled our student population. We then moved into new graduates through chemical and civil engineering. We added sustainable and resilient infrastructure programming since 2020, environmental engineering since 2000, computer science, artificial intelligence since 2018, bioinformatics since 2000, applied artificial intelligence in our electrical and computer engineering programs since 2020. Mechanical, we added biomedical engineering, advanced materials, and then engineering management since 2000. Digital transformation and innovation, new programs since 2020. That includes system sciences, applied data science, and user experience design. So we're trying to keep up using our traditional programs and adding to them. Then we have taken some bolder steps since 2021, 2022. We added a number of strategic partnerships, and we've signed a number of agreements. 150 Egyptian students under a Digital Egypt Builders Initiative, 150 working Canadians in the Master of Engineering Management online. I'll talk about that a bit more. But 150 students in the Faculty of Engineering upskilling certificate programs in partnership with our Professional Development Institute and various industrial partners. And then we also have 200 students in the Faculty of Engineering acquiring technical management skills. So we are also planning micro programs and industry partnered training and internationally partnered training in areas such as enterprise architecture and cybersecurity and interdisciplinary AI and cloud computing and robotics and IoT and sales engineering, data analytics, product development, and user experience design. Okay, so far, so good. You're getting the picture. We're aggressively trying to add the skills that we think will better position people for productive careers in this fairly rapidly changing and more technically oriented environment that we're in. Well, we also are preparing professionals for their changing careers by building a number of partnerships. And I won't get into these unless there are questions later, but essentially, we're not doing this alone. We're doing it with as many partners as are interested in playing a role in helping professionals reskill themselves. We are going one step further as well with, and this gives us way more flexibility in developing micro programs. That is taking parts of existing programs and putting them into combinations that are much more focused and much shorter programs. So the employers themselves are looking for something more specialized and not just for general degrees. And so we felt that micro programs was a way for us to very, very quickly do that. And I'll just make one last comment. And it does appear as a simple way of addressing, especially for reskilling purposes, going to online programs such as Coursera or Udemy or YouTube, et cetera. And it's interesting, what's happening is that they are now coming to us. They have realized that there is something that the university can add to simply online programs, and I'll try to talk that through in a second. So I guess what we're witnessing is something a little bit different that requires a different kind of response than simply adding new technical courses. And that is because of our enforced isolation over the last 2.5 years, and even now the reluctance of people to go back into an in-person environment. We're just seeing all the statistics are confirming how dramatic a shift, regardless of where in the world you are, how dramatic a shift we have actually made to embracing and integrating digital technologies into how work is done. So this is one example from some work put out by McKinsey, for example. But it's interesting that the shift that's taking place is not so much that it's going digital, it's just how pervasive it is and what it's being used to do. It's just providing a completely different platform. And I guess, going back to our friend Peter Drucker in his earlier piece, trying to make parallels between the industrial and information revolution, it's quite clear that the impacts are way, way more pervasive than simply adopting a new technology, which is the paradigm that many of us have used to try to explain things in the past. This is much more fundamental. So I guess the other element that became quite clear is that as of 2020, a lot of companies have taken on a fairly predictable strategy to deal with a crisis, and wouldn't expect anything less than that. But when you're forced to shut down your operations, when the prospect of empty stores is staring you in the face, when it is quite clear after 2 or 3 months that this is not going to last only 2 or 3 months. This is the kind of strategy that everybody has really been come to follow, simply because it seems to work. And that is, you sell out or cut business programs or initiatives where you need to save the core, whatever your core business is, at the expense of the things that were peripheral to what you did. Pressure to cut expenses and find new efficiencies, concentrate on and strengthen advantage, buying assets of distressed organizations at bargain basement prices is another activity that's been fairly typical over the last couple of years. Renegotiating terms with suppliers seems to make a lot of sense. Buyers want better terms. They may settle for something more rapid or reliable from a payment point of view. Focusing on employees and communities. We're asking a lot of our employees, and we're cutting deals with them. And we're basically saying, when this all passes, we will find ways of integrating you, paying you back somehow. So it's a formula that moved organizations to survival practices. And again, some more examples of that kind of activity. Now, another thing that started to happen, and this is maybe more germane to what we were trying to do at the University of Ottawa, is companies move to much more concentrated decision-making processes. They moved away from formal to informal. They set up work teams. They clumped those work teams together. They tasked them, worked very aggressively to deal with, again, a crisis. They looked at everything that was routine and asked, could it be done differently? Companies were building up their cash reserves just in case. Now, all of this, of course, was done remotely. It was all done virtually. And so it naturally gave impetus to making more and more use of digital tools to allow this kind of activity to take place. And so what was kind of novel and conceptual, many boardrooms talking about the possibility of having some virtual work possible in their companies or various organizations. And I recall in my own experiences having exactly those kinds of discussions, but it was way in the future. This was now right immediate. This was about having to make these kinds of communications work, having groups work together, having strangers working together in teams, etc. It all sort of became how you did work, how the company survived. There was a strong impetus to do this. And as is often the case when you have no choice but having to do something like this, what we end up doing is learning on the job, and we learn quickly. And so a combination of this cost cutting, finding a way for the company to survive and then thrive, and then working this kind of model, this intense model, started to give digital technologies increasing importance in the workplace. It just became a given. This is how things were going to get done. Now, what I find interesting is in dealing with experienced engineers is I can see the benefits of this immediately in virtual classroom settings where there isn't a lot of further teaching required to get students to clump together into teams and start doing productive things fairly quickly. Now, what is, I think, profound for, at least from our perspective, is that it was a shift, but this is a break from the past. This is not something that's going to, the new normal is not going to be the old normal, I guess is the saying I very often hear. we're going to move away from the expensive and the time-consuming. Look how difficult it is to get people to come back to an office, because after 2 years or 2.5 years, you start to see the benefits of working on this alternative platform. It's got something to contribute. Maybe not 100%, maybe not all the time, but we have learned a lot in the last 2.5 years about how to become more and more comfortable in this sort of environment. Now, the companies that are being successful, the ones who are coming out the other side, and I think at least a few of you will probably argue right business at the right time, and that's true, but there are many other organizations that have found the quicker they can build up their technological competency, the quicker that their employees become comfortable in the environment, the more successful they seem to become. And this would be the sort of results that are coming out of surveys and studies of the phenomena and the impact it's had on organizations that have been successful and those that aren't. So I guess on the positive side in the workforce, if you're learning how to use the technology, if you're comfortable in using the technology, future of work looks digital and it looks pretty bright. It's accelerating quite dramatically in these fields. And again, this is from some of the Coursera industry skills report, the kinds of work that increasingly are demanding new recruits and a growing workforce in all of these sorts of areas. Now, again, these are the new kinds of skills that people are looking for, whether it be in business or technology or in data science. And you can see they're all fairly technical in nature, even the ones in the business column. They're technical, but obviously connected to working in digital environments. But it's more than just technical, isn't it? It's a number of other things that are becoming important, such as analytical thinking and innovation, or active learning, or complex problem solving, critical thinking, et cetera, et cetera. These are problem-solving skills, self-management skills, working with people is important, and of course, the use of technology and development. So knowing the technologies isn't enough. Now, the sad side of the ledger is there are a number of jobs that are disappearing, and those were, in many cases, the traditional entry-level jobs that got you into the workforce, and then you would start your journey. So there is, I guess, this being the source of a lot of the livelihood anxiety. Now, online course training seems to be the preferred mode of instruction now, because you can't fill jobs just with new graduates. It would be nice if you could. It's upskilling existing employees, and that is an online proposition for many companies. There's lots of advantages of online, and I'll get to that in a second. So I guess in summary, what we've concluded is that we have moved to a virtual course format. We've expanded existing platforms at Ottawa U. We've looked at training and self-help. We've looked at inaugural standards in this new environment. And interesting, I did find another parallel in the Drucker work, which is we took what already was and we just made it work better. We used the same courseware, we just put it virtual, and that was the end of our initial thinking about what digital transformation meant. And of course, totally wrong. This is what we had done initially. But we also launched a pilot to experiment with course delivery in a different way. And so we realized that what we were dealing with was not a remote learning model, but an online learning model, which is a very different proposition than simply transferring over, as we did over one weekend, our courses, and all of a sudden everybody's on our screen and they're listening to a virtual Zoom class session of 3 hours. That wasn't really good enough. It was what we did, but it wasn't good enough. And so the pilot was launched. This is what it looks like. It's an online Masters of Engineering. It's a year, it's a program that lasts, that fits kind of what we are all about now. We realized that we had a very specific learner population in mind. We felt engineers with a few years of experience would benefit from upskilling, and a lot of engineers are very strong technically and by their own admission would recognize that when it comes to the dark arts of leadership and management, they could use a little bit of help. And so we designed it for exactly that purpose. And it is only for online consumption. And it's only for 3 hours once a week. Some are a little more aggressive and like to have 2 courses a term, but it's usually 1 course a term. And what we did, which was very different, is that we worked with a private sector organization who provide a lot of help on the recruitment, on the student support side, and constantly working with students to help us understand where we need to adjust on an ongoing basis. So we've run our first 2 cohorts. Where we're getting is a kind of an interesting profile. Students in the program are saying this is a program that works for them. Our student body is right across the country, from literally from Victoria to Newfoundland. It seems to work nicely for their objectives to continue to learn while they're on the job. What they like about it is that they can apply the learnings literally the next morning if they so wish. And there's that sort of pragmatism and very practical view of how to use this education, I think kind of fits with generally how online learning is perceived to offer some benefits to many students. Well, we've got that built now into a university program, which is in itself kind of unusual. So what makes it different than, and what we've had to do that makes it very different, is that we had to set up at the University of Ottawa a group that's focused specifically on digitizing the content using, and it's a group called Teaching and Learning Support Services. They develop online programs with faculty members who wish to be part of this program. So you can see it's got quite a lot of technical horsepower. It's digital development, it's instructional learning, it's some administrative elements to it, educational tools and techniques, and it goes through this very, very structured process. And I won't get into it on a step-by-step basis, but I think what is important is that it isn't left to the devices of a single professor, maybe who's got lots of experience and knows the subject matter. We also force it into a storyboard and eventually into lessons, lesson plans, and eventually it gets translated into various tools and techniques that are made available on an online learning system. So it's a, very structured process, which takes the content which might be woolly, loosey-goosey, and turns it into something quite structured and planned, all focused on well-defined learning objectives. So, and I just put this in here just to assure you that there's a whole series of steps that are taken involving this technical group, the key path people, the professors themselves, and their interactions with a private sector partner. We then go through a number of these sorts of elements built into the program. And then a lot of multitasking that takes place in the development phases with storyboards and multimedia, etc. Then we have an evaluation process, so we never get away scot-free if we didn't do our jobs, and we're in constant contact with students to see that what we're doing is having a positive effect on them. And these are the elements, the deliverables that are built into the program. So this is a huge step for us away from simply taking what we had in the classroom and putting it onto the computer screen. There's a whole process behind it now. It's a very structured approach to providing learning content online for, in our case, very targeted students. And we do a lot of tools, of course. We use Brightspace and MS Teams. We also build in our immersive experiences, we build in things like simulations. In one case, we're using a simulation that's used extensively in boardrooms. A lot of casework, a lot of practical applications, a lot of analogies, alternative perspectives, speakers, etc. And then I think the last piece I'd like to leave you with is knowing the need for involvement by students. We have also developed a program that's made up of fairly mature students who want to speak. They don't want to just be talked at. And so what we're finding is we're creating approaches to learning that forces them to start talking, to start sharing, and eventually they become just as much part of the what happens in a 3-hour classroom as the instructor. As the instructor starts to become more of a facilitator and less of a dictator. And I think I'm just going to say that's all I'm going to leave it at.
Right. Excellent presentation, Jack. Thank you so very much. Unfortunately, we only have about 3 minutes left before we have to move on to the next session. I'd encourage anyone who has any questions to do so in the chat. But while we're waiting, Jack, have there been other academic institutions that have reached out to you and other areas within the University of Ottawa looking for lessons learned to replicate what you have gone through?
Well, a lot of questions being asked, and the folks that we're working with, the private company that we're working with, are now also working with Telfer in a health management executive program, all online. So we now have 2 examples at the University of Ottawa, and I know that this model is starting to slowly find itself in places like Wilfrid Laurier and some of the smaller universities as well. Much more extensive in the US than it is in Canada. So we're a bit of doing some trailblazing here.
Yeah, I could only imagine. So this is the new norm, is it? Will we ever go back to
well, I
the way it was?
I think we would like there to be a reversion back.
Yeah.
My thinking is students actually have shown a preference for certain elements of online. Generally, international students love in class, but and Canadian students like virtual. That's kind of where we are now. My guess is we'll have a hybrid of some sort where certain classes will be held or certain parts of classes will be held online and others will be in person. Generally, where you're experiential, where you're sharing cases, for example, and having heated discussions about various aspects related to the course, you'd want to do that in class. And my guess is that the more rote stuff, the readings, and we can even tape the lectures, and we can put those online, and students can look at them at their leisure rather than appointed hours. So I think it will be a hybrid.
Okay. Once again, Jack, thank you so much on behalf of everyone in attendance. Really learned a lot. And we'll close the session now and move on to the next one.
Cheers.